How you doing? I'm James. Welcome back to the Scenery Farm. I'm building some risers for a show, and these are curved face risers. And there's two types here. Well, there's three, I suppose. I have these ones here, which are 8 inches tall, and then I have 16-inch tall risers. They have a plywood frame, and then they have almost like mini stud wall faces. There's the lid, which has a rabbet on the underside of it, and then the kick, which is the bottom plate, which is what this plywood, this face plywood, snake ply, wiggle ply, it's 3/8 of an inch, or just it's around 5/16 of an inch. It's called 3/8 though. And this one here is faced all the way to the ground. This one here is obviously faced to the ground. They were cut out differently. Each of these pieces was laid out in CNC or in a CAD program, and then I cut them out on a CNC. And so I show you the assembly of this riser here and what I do to give it strength. This bullnose riser here, which is 16 inches tall, made exactly the same way. It is, I do this all by hand. So if you don't have a CNC, I show you how to do the layout for a curve. There's a lot of different ways to cut curves. I show you how to use a router on a trammel arm. And then this one's all done not using the CNC. And then over here, I have two risers. This meets up against a 4x8 riser. So a standard 16-inch tall, actually it's a parallel riser. Another place is in behind this one, upstage of the other side. I have box tops because there's a piano that goes on top of it. And this one here, it's just fairing out this curve, and then it meets up against standard rectangular risers upstage of it. And then this dude here has no curve on the face, but I just want to show you it really doesn't need structure in behind there. Once this is all locked in, this overhang of 4 or 5 inches, I might put a foot here, but it really doesn't need anything. It goes and it just fits right up against the other riser. There's a center stage portion here, which I'm not showing you. It's just an 8-inch tall, 2 feet deep, 6 foot long box top riser, which is going to be painted to match. So this, the set designer on this show did an excellent job asking for as few custom risers as possible, using as many stock risers as possible. And now I'm going to show you what the underside of these risers look like, and I'm going to take you through the process of building this riser here from scratch and that riser there.
Here's a view of the risers just laying in the paint space. They've been filled, and they haven't been sanded yet. You can see that's chippiness there. I'm using a shop grade birch, which is very chippy. Notice there I have the cross grain and the riser that sits on the floor. I'd never do that if it were a riser like this that's on legs. But plywood's expensive these days, so I'm using up those little pieces. And this has got some legs in it, and there's the skirt. You can see the wiggle and the kick. And this is me, and I'm just about to cut the sweeps with the trammel arm. So that just gets it up to the level of the plywood that I'm working on. This is the actual trammel arm. Those pieces are fixed in place. That's a piece of plate steel. Oh, this is the spiral cut bit that I'm going to use in the router. Excellent focus job there. A couple pins and a couple half-inch round steel and some plate that's countersunk. Probably didn't need to be. And then here's the 3 1/4 horse router. I have a 1/2 inch collet in there. Pop in the spiral cut bit. That one's a 3/8 spiral cut bit. And then I tighten her up, and once I tighten her up, I'm going to attach the trammel points onto the router. Pardon the noise in the background. There's just other people working here, and well, I need to get the video done nowish. Oh, there's the other person working here. So you can see that there are holes in this base. It's white metal of some description. I've broken one of these before. I do all the tightening of these 1/4 bolts by hand. There was a guy I worked with once who used my router and did the tightening with a drill, and it just popped the white metal apart. Broke it completely, so I never use a drill when I'm tightening or loosening these. And then that gives me about a foot of play in the actual trammel arm once I attach it to the piece of plywood. And the plywood is the arm part of the trammel arm. I just screw it in with some 3/4 inch number 8 flathead screws. And the alignment of that really doesn't matter too much. The point on which this will pivot is a number 8 screw. And what matters most is the distance of the hole for the screw from the bit. And it doesn't have to be straight on the piece of wood. By its very nature, the 2 points will be a straight line. And as long as when I lay this out, so I'm just flushing that to the underside there, so the bit is lined up at the bottom of the router. As long as I get the distance, and I actually went the distance on the inside of the router, not the outside of the router, and I marked 5 foot 3/8 of an inch there because that's the inside of it. And once I have my mark, I really don't have to worry about being centered on the board because it's always going to be a straight line. So I take a countersink, or I just want the pre-drill part of that countersink, and I drill a hole from the underside where I've made my mark, and then I know what I have on the top. And this is literally just a piece of scrap fur that's been that was in my shop. I have some that are rounded over, and I couldn't find them, and I like them being rounded over, and you'll see why later. I have that board that runs up the center. I've put that in the proper place, meaning it's centered on the board that it's laying on top of, and that board is centered on the board on which I'm doing the routing. And I do my mark, and then I figure out my mark to center on that board, and then that will be center of the circle. And I just double check that from that point, from the center of the board. And now I have kind of an XY coordinate there. I put a hole in it. I pre-drill the hole. I like pre-drilling the hole because it helps line up the screw later. So this hole placement does matter, and it has to be lined up on a radial line with respect to how the circle will touch both corners of this 4x8 sheet of plywood, which I'm about to route. I always write down what the dimension is on the hole. I mean, it doesn't really last that long in terms of the world, but it'll last long until the job is done, because sometimes you end up doing multiple holes, and if you have that note there to yourself, then you don't have to fight with it later. This screw is filled with dust, and I usually use another screw or a scribe or something to clear the dust out of those. And that was the first random screw I just stuck in my pouch. So in a couple months, when I empty my pouch again, which I just did recently, I will find that screw one more time. And all I'm doing is I set it so I had the screw sticking out of the board, and then I moved it so it lined up with the hole, and then I just tightened it down. I didn't overly tighten it, I just tightened it till it was snug. It won't be used for that terribly long, so if it were being used over and over and over again, I would probably put a washer on the top so that the screw would ride on the washer and not rub away the top of the board, as the underside of the countersunk head is somewhat dimpled. And you can see I've just figured out that the 2 Bessey clamps on the far end of the bench are hitting my trammel arm. So I could have cut the trammel arm, but I just changed it out for the clamps that I use on my track saw, which have a lower profile. That way the trammel arm can swing quite nicely. And here I go. Also very exciting. I just make sure that it lines up with the corners on both sides, and if the math is right, it will. And if it isn't, well, that happens. You just fix it. But this is a good way to check. And the inside of the bit, what you want to ensure is that the inside of the bit lines up with the corners, and it does. So I've just set the depth, and I go somewhat lightly on this one, where I do it in 3 or 4 passes. I go back and forth, and right now when I start going back, I hit with the trammel arm, the corner of the trammel arm. That's because it's a sharp edge and it's not rounded over, and there's just a wee bit of fir plywood hanging down on the trammel arm, so I just kind of clean that up a bit by hand, and then I get back and forth and keep doing it. If that were rounded over, it would slide over that moment of intersection quite nicely, but I couldn't find those ones. They're somewhere in the shop. I don't pull out the trammel arm that much, especially now since I have that M2 Maslow. There's the trammel arm hitting the edge of the plywood again. And I'm just going back and forth. And if you don't have your cord up above like I have mine, it can also get run over by the trammel arm, so that's a bit of maintenance you have to do when you're going back and forth. But those ceiling hanging plugs are somewhat useful for this moment. So I'm just doing the math because this is done. That's the top of the riser. It's done. Now what I'm doing is the sweep that is underneath the lid, right on the ground, and the outside diameter of that sweep is 3/8 of an inch less than the outside diameter of the lid, because the wiggle board sits up against the face of the kick. So I'm just putting the countersink in there, and I'm making a sweep that is 3/8 of an inch smaller than the sweep I just made. I have to figure out where it goes on that centered board, and I'm probably going to move it forward towards the camera about 4 or 5 inches. And then I'm going to, I don't know what the dimension is. I did move it forward. The probable dimension is about 4 and 5 inches, 4 or 5. And then I just make sure that I have enough clearance in front of the other sweep. And I really only need to do the outside sweep here. The inside sweep, it's all going to be hidden underneath the riser. I just do a second cut because I do a second cut. I don't really need to. And what I end up doing is, you can see it's outside there. I'm using the offcut from that riser top, and I'm just setting the depth. I'm wondering what I'm thinking about. I'm concentrating very hard. But I'm just probably figuring out whether or not I like this position or not, and I don't think I do. I move it forward, it seems. And when I do move it forward, I will have enough clearance in the center. So this is quite an easy fix, it seems. Move it just a bit. I can't remember what I was avoiding there, because I didn't move it a heck of a lot. Well, whatever it was, I'm sure it was exceedingly important. I'm very happy I did it. I'm going to tell my children about it one day. And here I go. I actually am a bit more aggressive with this. I mean, it's a big chubby motor, and that's a 3/8 spiral cut bit. I'm fairly certain it's carbide also, but even if it were high-speed steel, it would have no problem chewing through this birch plywood. And I do that. I think I'm taking about 5/16, a thin 3/8 of an inch depth there. And then I go down and I do this in 2 sweeps. Now I'm not cutting all the way through the board. I'm leaving a fat 1/16 of an inch towards an 1/8 of an inch remaining on the underside of the board. And that's simply because I want it to stay together. When I'm done this very exciting process, I'm going to then cut the back of this, and then I'm going to take a jigsaw and I'm going to liberate these pieces from each other and the piece of plywood, and I'm going to move on with the project. I'm set up for the inside of that curve, but I want to move it ever so slightly. Instead of moving the screws, which I absolutely can do, I've opted to loosen off the 1/4-20 bolts there, and I'm sliding it on the trammel arms, or the little pins that go inside the router there. The whole thing's the trammel arm. And I'm just lining it up with the previous kerf. And I do about a 2-inch wide bottom kick, which is really kind of narrow. I normally do 2.5 inch or up, but I was quite happy. There's the underside of the trammel arm not being rounded over, biting me in the butt again. So I do about a 2-inch sweep, which is fairly minimal. I would, like I'm saying, I would go a bit bigger than that, but it'll work. This is a one-time use riser. It's definitely going to be strong enough for the show. It's not touring. All those things kind of play into it. So it was a decision that didn't have a whole lot of impact on the world. I finished the cut and I've set the depth again, and I'm ready to go back and finish cutting through. And as I say, I'm doing this in a much more aggressive fashion. I just do 2 sweeps, and once I'm done those 2 sweeps, that's the end of this part, this video. The next video, I'm going to liberate those pieces from their plywood with a jigsaw and flush trim them and move on with the rest of the project. We'll see you next video.